knowledge and his experience that he's acquired over, from over 20 years of professional photography, going on 30 years, right?
Full time for 30 years. Yeah. So yeah, this year is 2021. This is 30 years.
So, he's seen how photography has changed, the changes and how, but he also shares with people the basics behind photography that have remained unchanged. And so when when Jim shares this information, he does so within an hour and a half period of time. You get a whole photography class, almost as in some cases, I don't know how you do it. You've crammed almost a semester's worth of in an hour and a half, but it's each class is different. Some of it's going to be very more oriented toward, say, the professional portrait photographer. Sometimes it's going to be more generic, where it's good information whether or not you're a portrait artist, a landscape artist, a wildlife photographer. It's never the same. So if you are an artist and you hear, okay, photography school, photo tips monthly, I'm not interested in that. Well, you might find that some of the information, and there's a good chance some of the information that Jim shares will be pertinent and will be applicable. Now, we do have a lot of photographers that use FinerWorks. We're a favorite with many photographers, but we don't share this. This information is not meant to be just for those photographers. It's meant for both professional, hobbyists, in photography, as well as, like I said, those in more traditional art fields. With all that said, Ian, here's Jim Landers, and today we're going to be talking about
I'll let you say it out, Melissa. Sorry.
It's okay. I wasn't sure if you were still looking down after the photography. And this is just a reminder that if you're watching on Zoom, just use the chat there. And if you're watching on YouTube live, you can use the chat option there. Jim has made the handout available in the Zoom chat, and I will have that over onto our YouTube chat in just a second. So with that, Jim, I'm going to turn over control to you so that you can go ahead and
be in control.
Yeah, here you go. Share that on your screen with us.
Cool. Well, thank you, Melissa, for all that you're doing to improve the creative community, and James for that wonderful intro, and as well as all the things that you're doing to the part that you guys play to uplift the creative community. There's a lot of us. Some of us are full time. Some of us do this on the side, but it's because of hard work and effort by you guys that these tools are available to us. A show like this is way above and beyond what you'd expect from your printer. And that's maybe you want them to think of you as more than just that stereotype of these are the guys who take care of this part of it. And you are so much more than that, even without things like this. But because of things like this, I really appreciate what you're doing to help out the creative community, including photographers.
Well, we try.
You guys rock. Well, I guess I needed to hit record, didn't I? All right, now I've hit record. Well, I want to welcome you guys to another episode of the Photo Tips Monthly, where we bring lots of different subjects to you every single month. Every single month has a totally different topic And some of those you're going to find very interesting. Others of them you may not have quite as much an interest in, but there's always some little tidbit, like James was saying, there's always something that you can gain from it, whether you're a portrait photographer or any other type of artist. There's always something that could be gained from this. Today, we're talking about after the photography, which means everything you're doing after you have created your images with your digital medium, your camera. And there's a lot of things that you can do. As far as artists who create an image just for painting purposes, you will want to know these kind of things, what to do, what things to consider, what options are there, because there's a lot of different options. We'll talk about some of them today, but there's a tremendous amount. We really can't go over everything there is to do after the photography. I mean, even just Photoshop alone or Lightroom alone, or something alone is over way more than you can talk about in an hour or an hour and a half. So we'll be skimming over some things, kind of like James was saying, a whole semester's worth of stuff. It's skimming over a whole semester's worth of stuff, but it's not the details that you'd get in a whole semester. I'm not that good, so but appreciate you guys being here. Well, if you've got the handout, follow along with me. If you don't, then just pull out your notepad and pen and keep up with me that way. Did I close out? I did. Hang on just a second. I accidentally X'd out of the wrong file. I have the wrong one open, but it's close because there it is. All right. So after the photography, so this includes backing up images. It includes image file types. There's a lot of them. It includes prepping for the printer. It includes what's possible in Photoshop. It's not a Photoshop class though, and quite a bit more. So we've created our beautiful photographs. What's next? Well, a lot of stuff is next. Some people think that after the photography is done, that a photographer is done. I mean, I've seen this so many times. I'll tell you a quick story. I was photographing an event for a chamber of commerce, and it was in an awards event, and it had dinner, and it was, I don't know, probably like filet mignon or something. It was really good, and during dinner there wasn't anything that was going to needed to be photographed. It was just the dinner, and so they invited me to sit down in the only spot that was available. And I was introduced to the person next to me who had this belief that photographers really don't do very much, that it's just a matter of clicking a button. It was a lawyer, and I was introduced to him as a lawyer, and the host said my name to him, and then I think left. But the person that I was introduced to didn't introduce himself with his name. He pointed at me and he said, "You photographers are price gougers." But in my mind, I'm thinking, and I didn't say this, you're a lawyer. What? Oh, how are photographers price gougers when you're a lawyer? Well, okay. So I don't know how to respond to something like that, because this was an odd thing coming from a lawyer. A photographer being called a price gouger, we certainly are not. But from his point of view, we were. And I could see that was the case, but I needed to ask him the only question that I could think of. Why do you feel that way? And he said, well, I'll tell you, my daughter got married 2 weeks ago. That photographer was there for 4 hours, and he charged me $4,000 for that. Do you know that's $1,000 an hour? And I'm thinking, wow, he thinks photographers are stupid too. Well, so he said, that's $1,000 an hour. I said, I don't even charge that much. I charge close to that, but I don't even charge that much. And he said, and I've got education, I've got an office, I have employees, I've got liability insurance. He listed off a bunch of things that he had that supported what he got paid. And you guys just show up, press the button a handful of times, and you're done. I was thinking, man, he said this to the right person. And I said, so I have, and I listed every single thing back to him. I have a degree in what I do. I have an office. I have employees. I have liability insurance. I have every single thing he said. I just said it right back to him. And that story actually goes on a little bit longer, but the point is, his opinion of a photographer was that we show up, we press the easy button, we get paid the big bucks, and we price gouge as a result. And we leave and we're done, and we can go play and party with our friends afterwards. There is a lot to do after the photography. So is a photographer done when they're done behind the camera? That is a very small percentage of the time that a photographer spends, a very small percentage. For me, it's less than 10%. And it could be as much as, so that would mean that it's 10 times the amount of time you spend behind the camera is spent doing other things in your business. And sometimes it's as much as 20 times more than the time I spend behind the camera. So not even close is a photographer done, because now the real work begins. The fun part's over. The part you enjoy the most, it's done. But the real work begins. And besides, do you really want your wonderful images to never be seen and just sit there on a hard drive? By the way, hard drives will eventually fail. I have lost hard drives before. Luckily, I always have them backed up, but I have. I have lost, I think, 4 over the years. Lost 4 hard drives. So yeah, it happens. Luckily, 2 were in a NAS that has 4. It's got 4 in it, redundant, and they happen at different times, so it was a total non-issue. But we're going to talk about backing up today. Maybe you want to print a few of your photographs. What then? Of course, you only have so much wall space, and long before you fill that available wall space, your spouse will probably put a stop to it. Do you want to display your work online? Maybe you do already. Just to share with others, or maybe to get critiqued? How about selling your work? We can do this. We should do this. This seminar is an overview of some of the most common things photographers do after the photography, including backing up and storing images, editing images, enhancing images, what's possible in image enhancement, saving artwork images and to different file types, and preparing for printing. Excuse me. So first, let's talk about backing up, because it's the first thing a photographer does when they return from a photography session. And so you don't want to run the risk of losing your images. So the very first thing you should do is create a plan to back up your images, and then follow that plan every single time. A series of steps. I have them all written down with a check mark on them. Every single job has a list of all the things they do. There's a total of 31 steps. And so each one of them, I go through this check mark, and I just check it off, put a date on it, and initial it. If it's something that I do, I don't usually initial it, but if it's something that someone else might do, then there's a space to initial, so I know who did it. Lately, for the past 2 years, I've been doing the backups myself. But before that, someone else did. Robin did that. So there's no one right way to back up your images, but you do have to have a right way for you. So first, download the images from the card onto the hard drive of your computer, or to a NAS, and that's how I do it. I download it to a NAS. Now, I used to download it straight to my computer drive until many years ago, when I realized that was not the best option. In fact, I keep no images on my computer's hard drive at all. I keep very little on my computer's hard drive other than programs. Everything else is on the NAS, the network accessible storage. I think that's what it stands for. It's just a redundant system of hard drives. There's 4 in mine, 4 terabytes. Each one is 4 terabytes. So it's a total of 16, but they're redundant, so 4 terabytes. And second, you want to back these up. And if you have the handout, you're actually looking at a previous version. I just realized I haven't updated this in a while because there's only 2 steps. There's the backing it, the backing it up, but the way that I do that is not just directly backing it up to my NAS. It's doing it through Lightroom. So I use Lightroom. I open up Lightroom. I go through the steps. There's the when you hit import, there's 3 things you do. You tell Lightroom where it is, where the images can be found. Then you choose the images that you want, and I choose save as DNG, digital negative. And once I've chosen the images that I want, usually I only have one job on a card, and so I can choose all photos, but sometimes there's more than one, and so I would need to subdivide it. But I choose the ones that I want. Then I go over to that 3rd panel and I tell it where it can go. Now I do enter in several different things to make that process easier. I enter in keywords. I have certain things that I do on all photographs. So I've got that preset set in, so I don't have to do that every single time. But then I upload those and just wait for it to upload into or download onto my NAS in Lightroom. And then I walk away for a little while and take care of that. Now, the other thing, having it on your NAS is good. And because it's redundant, that's fantastic. Chances are nothing's going to happen to it mechanically, technology-wise, most likely. But there are some things that can happen that are totally beyond your control. Fire, flood, there's a lot of things that a local backup is susceptible to, problems that is susceptible to. And so I use Carbonite. And no, I don't get a percentage if you call in. I'm not an affiliate of Carbonite, but that's what I use. I use Carbonite at carbonite.com. This is an automatic backup. Now, make sure if you have a NAS there's an upgraded version. There's one that just backs up your own computer. There's an upgraded version that costs just a little bit more, that upgrades that goes off of your other hard drives. And so that's the one I get because I don't have it on my hard drive, on my computer's hard drive, and it's just a little bit more. And so there's
storage size is that, Jim? Based on like what's kind of storage size are you getting with Carbonite? I know a lot of people, again, especially with artists and stuff, who look for maybe they just use the Google Drive, their cloud drives, Dropbox to kind of save their images. What do you get with what kind of file storage do you get with Carbonite?
I don't know what the basic includes, but I have an upgraded version that it's not limited.
Okay.
I think it's $270 a year.
That's not bad. Not for that kind of protection.
And I might be wrong on that price. I don't remember. It seems like the amount I paid was $270, but it could have been a 2-year. But anyway, but that's automated. So I don't actually do anything. Well, you have to set it up, but once you set it up, it's set it and forget it. Which I don't want to have to remember, at the end of each day to back things up. I'll forget. I mean, I even have my bills on automatically paid because I would forget to pay my credit card bill or something. So I have those on. I'm grateful for automation. I don't know if that's a creative thing. That we forget some things. It's not high on that priority list. It's important, but all right. So I have come across photographers that just continuously buy new memory cards and they store their memory cards. I don't choose to do that. I don't think that's a bad thing. As cheap as memory cards are, maybe that is a good way to do it. I just haven't chosen to do it that way. Each time I do a job, I clear the card and put it in my camera and format it so that it effectively is a fresh card each time. So that's how I choose to do it. But I've seen people do that. They think it's effective. There is space on these cards to write a little something. So, maybe that is the way to go. That's an old card right there. We'll be talking about cards here in a second, but well, let's just talk about it now. So on these cards, when you purchase these cards, there's certain things that are on them, and I'm trying to get it close enough where it will focus. Well, something like that. All right, so it's supposed to focus on its own. I paid extra for an autofocus camera. What the heck?
Let's see.
Maybe if I put something
if you want to
behind
share
it.
your screen of your handout, you have a good picture on there.
That's true.
You can increase the size if you need to.
That. Well, anyway, on you guys that probably know what I'm talking about anyway. So, yeah, that's what I'll do. That's a good idea. So you can see that now.
Mm-hmm.
And then view and zoom in a bit more. 200 will do it. All right. So that's this exact card that I have. I just keep it handy. 8 gigabytes at one time was a huge card, and now probably can't even find them anymore. But when I first switched to digital, that was in 2002. It was February 2002, and at the time they did have these cards available. They were big. They were CF cards, but the largest of them was smaller than 1 gig.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to get a gigabyte, which the largest I found was 1 gigabyte in 2002, and 1 gigabyte at that time was $400, and I had 4 1 gigabyte cards at that time. I'm glad that prices have come down on these so much. But what you'll see on this card is that right under where it says Extreme Pro, that number there, it says 95 megabits per second. That is the upload speed. So read and write speed. And that's an okay speed. There's faster. But there are some cards that are slower and some are a lot slower. And let's see if I have one over here that's this one is so slow it's not even going to show the amount. That space is blank. But that's just the read write speed, and the larger that number is, the quicker it is writing to your card and uploading to your computer when you're downloading those images or uploading those images.
Jim, how important is that though in photography? And I can understand in maybe videography,
mm-hmm.
and that's write speed. But read speed is different.
Yeah, it is.
But with photography, obviously doesn't hurt the faster you can write images to that disk. Your camera can write images to that disk. Doesn't hurt to have it super fast. But in photography, when are you going to ever need speeds?
Well, if you only had one image, it's a non-issue. But if you've created a whole bunch of them, the faster that is, the higher the number that is, the quicker it's going to upload into your computer.
Well, would it, or because that reads that uses the read speed versus the write speed?
I may be wrong, but I thought it did make a difference.
Maybe it's maybe someone smarter than us. But,
yeah.
Because and maybe it does the reads, because I do know that when in some cases read and write are can be used simultaneously. I don't know. I would think that'd be more if you're writing to a disk,
mm-hmm.
Like saving a photo to a disk, because it has to.
Yeah, it goes to the buffer of the camera first.
Is mm-hmm. on it, but yeah, I just wondered, because I was always under the impression that those higher speed disks were really
just for writing,
helpful if you're doing like videography. But
they certainly are.
Photographers are using their cameras now to capture
mm-hmm.
video. So,
and there are cards that are made for video that are optimized for it.
Yeah.
The sports photographers need real fast buffering. Otherwise the camera will fill up and it can't write to the card fast enough.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. Yeah, when you use the burst mode on your drive, when you're pressing the shutter, it will max out. It'll just stop after a little bit.
Okay.
It's filled the buffer memory. Now, buffer memory is part of the camera. That has nothing to do with your card.
Well, and I guess the higher speed discs are going to help in those burst mode situations.
Yes. Yeah, just because they write faster.
Yeah, and the size of the photos that are being captured now, because these are no longer 3 megabyte files. These are
they can be huge. That's right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I printed something, probably within the first 5 years of starting, so probably around 2005. I printed something, took it to a printer, and the image that I sent them was over 400 gigabytes, one image. And they said they had never seen a file so large before, and they weren't even sure they could print it. They did. They were able to.
Yeah.
And I don't remember now what it was. I really don't remember. I think I stitched images. I think it was a bunch of images that I stitched together, but it was huge. Stitching is pretty darn cool. I don't really do that, but I did that. I did it that time. So, yeah.
Well,
any other thoughts on the discs?
No, I probably thought too much about it. See, we're my thinking cap. Yep.
That's fun. You also on these discs see the where it says SDHC, so a secure digital high capacity. And the older ones, this really made a difference with older ones. Now it's not that big a deal anymore. Everything can be read. There are some older machines, or some if someone does their own dye sub printing, there are some old machines that won't take the HC, the high capacity. And so that is something to consider if you're going to be doing dye sub printing, like instant printing at an event. Make sure that that your printer can handle these high capacity cards, but this really isn't considered high capacity so much anymore. That problem has pretty much been resolved. But you do see underneath that over to the side, you see the U1 and the C with a 10 in it. So that one that used to be a symbol of a best. Now that number, I think the highest is 3. It could be higher than that. Do you guys know? I mean, if I'm buying, I want to get a 3, not a 1. A 1's fine. It's not going to be a problem, but I want the 3. And then that C with a 10, those come in different qualities as well. The one I want there is a 10. Now you can, let's see, is this one a lower? Yeah. Let me stop that share, and you can see one that's lower. That one has a 4. So I want the 10. 150 megabits per second. The V30, I have forgotten what that means, but I believe it's has something to do with either reading or writing. So those are the cards, and there's lots of different types of cards. There are a lot of cameras that use the CF cards, the compact flash, which are a little bit larger. Those were when I switched, that was what everybody used, was CF cards. They're right before that. The first time I was introduced to digital, first time I bought a digital camera was in '99, but that was for fun. That was just for playing, and that had what was called a smart card. That was not a smart card. It was the opposite of a smart card. It was probably the dumbest card they ever had. But that's what they called it at that time. But you see all these different these different card types, and of course you just get the one that's optimized for your camera. There's the large SD cards that are quite a bit bigger, and those are definitely more for sports photographers. Portrait photographers don't really need that, but there's a ton of that stuff available. So definitely spend some time researching that. Having external hard drives, I use a NAS, but having external hard drives, that's a good solution. But I definitely think that it's a combination of having local backup drives and some type of online automatic cloud backup. And there's a lot of options out there for that. So I mentioned one, but that's not the only one. So next thing, let's talk about once I have those images in my Lightroom, they are backed up to my hard drive, my NAS. And so I'm not worried about them anymore. It's 4 times redundant. So I have 4 backups, local, 4 local backups. It takes a little bit more time to get them in the cloud. It takes a lot more time overnight. But they will eventually get there, and I'm not worried about it. But the next step is to edit my images. Now, a lot of people start thinking Photoshop, but there's a step that happens before that. This is where you go through your images and you cull them. So I don't need to share every single image with my client. I want to cull my images. I want to get rid of a bunch of them. Now, I know in some instances that, if you're photographing events or something, maybe you've made an arrangement where you're giving them every single photograph. I just never do that. I want control over my work. I only want good stuff out there, stuff that I am proud of. And so I never show every single image I create. And I get comments like, man, every single photograph was amazing. Well, it's because I edit. I get rid of the ones I don't want to show. And the way I do that in Lightroom is I use a star system, and the ones I want to keep, I give a 5-star. The ones I want to get, I don't want to show, are given a 1-star. I don't delete them. They're still there. There may be some element that I need that I can use in Photoshop later, changing out a smile on someone's face, changing out a background. There could be a reason why I would need it. And so I'm actually not deleting it, but I am never going to show it. But I'm culling the images. Now, I used to permanently delete, so I wouldn't have to mess with them anymore. But this has become so darn easy in Lightroom, I just see no reason to get rid of it. And because the cost of memory has come down so low that I'm not really worried about the space either, the space on my hard drive. So in the handout, if you have the handout, it does say permanent delete, because that's what I used to do. But it's been a number of years since I did that. I realize I'm showing you the one that hasn't been updated. Still the same good information though. All right, so once I have gone through those images and I've given the 1-stars and the 5-stars, I actually go back and look at those 5 stars. And those images that are very similar to each other, I'm going to pick and choose the ones I think are best. So if there's just one little tiny thing that's off and another one is better in that area, I'm going to get rid of that one little tiny thing that's off. So I do try to narrow it down. Let's say it's a portrait session. It's different for different types of work that I do, but let's say it's a portrait session. I want to narrow that down to just a handful of images. So, if I create 100, by the way, some portrait photographers are creating 200, 400, 500, 1,000. If you're doing that, you don't realize how much time you're wasting. I mean, in your mind, it may have crossed your mind that, oh yeah, take a lot of time. You are causing that problem. It's not the photography session. It's not the family. It's you that's causing the problem. You're the one in control. And so I usually create 60 images. I mean, it depends on the session. It depends on the number of family members. I photographed a family that had 10 kids just recently. So I did create more than 60 images for that one. But for the most part, I try to keep it in under 60, and I try to only show about 30. I found that the more images I show, the lower the sale is going to be. Besides, who's the expert? Me. I know which one is going to be printed best. I already know where on their wall it's going to go. So therefore, I know which ones are going to look best in that space, because we had a planning session that caused me to know that information. So I'm narrowing that down. I want to show them 20, 25, 30, at the most 40. But the more that I show, the longer time it takes and the harder it is for them to make a decision. If they at some point feel like, you know what, I don't I'm gonna, and I do in-person sales. So I am with them because I care. I mean, if I didn't care about them, I just throw them online and cross my fingers and hope that they bought something. But I care about my client and I want to walk them through this process. They're not the expert. I'm the expert. So why would the expert not walk them through the process? I don't understand that. So I walk them through the process and I help them. And I don't want this process to take forever. I know they've got other things going on in their life. And so I show them the cream of the crop, and that's it. And I do light artwork on those. So enhancing the images is that next step. Now I'm enhancing at 2 different points. I do some light enhancements at first. And then once they've chosen the images that they want, at that point, I'm going to do some fine tuning to the images that they want. I'm not going to fine tune every single image because it just takes too much time. And I know how many hours I can spend per client because I've done my numbers. So I know exactly how much time I'm able to spend per client, and I do my best to stay within that amount because I know what that does if you don't. But you'd have to know your numbers in order to understand that. And that's really for the portrait photographer. That's where that comes in the most. So enhancing the images. Now, this can be done in Lightroom. Light artwork should be done in Lightroom or some equivalent. There are others out there, Capture One, there's a bunch of others. And then there's some things that really can't be done well in Lightroom. That's when I would move it to Photoshop. But generally at the beginning, I'm not doing anything Photoshop. Photoshop comes in if I need to do fine tuning to it. And that's after they've chosen the images that they want. So, and there's a lot of digital image manipulation programs. Corel, MyPaint, Pencil, PhotoPos Pro, Helios Paint, Paint.com, Dia, InfraView, GIMP, GNU image manipulation program, Google Picasa, and some of these don't even exist anymore. Tux Paint, Inkscape, Photoscape. There's a ton of different image manipulation programs. They all have their place. I just go with the standard Photoshop. Besides, the subscription's only $10 a month for both Photoshop and Lightroom. So, and if you want to add in cloud storage, which if that's part of your workflow, that might be the way to go. But if you want to add in cloud storage, then it does cost a little bit more, but it's really not that much. They don't charge much for their cloud storage. So on a basic level, there's 2 different types of digital manipulation. There's the global, and that affects the entire image. So color balance. If you think it's too yellow, then you can adjust the color balance to it. It affects the entire image. If you think it's too dark, you can brighten it up. Global, it affects the entire image. And then specific, when you are affecting a certain specific area of the photograph, you're getting rid of a pimple, you're getting rid of a power line in the background. So global and specific. By the way, I call digital manipulation artwork, retouching. I call it artwork because it's part of the work of doing my art. So artwork. You can call it whatever you want. If you're a portrait photographer, your clients probably expect you to call it retouch. I still call it artwork, even with my clients. I do explain to them what it means, though. Any thoughts on the artwork so far?
And on those, you would say doing that individually per image, correct? Not, I know there's people who want to do stuff quickly and want to do autocorrect, which I'm like, I cringe at when people tell me they're going to autocorrect everything. And I'm like, I don't know if you want to do that. And I mean, I suggest that also like with artists who shoot their art. A lot of artists ask us with our printing whether they should do the auto correct, kind of auto color correct on our print when they submit. James and I both tell a lot of people, and we'll get on here, and we really suggest that only for photography and not for art because of the white point. So when people are shooting artwork as of like created on a canvas or something like along those lines, we don't recommend it because autocorrect only works so well. But so for when you're doing all of this, you're doing this by image, each individual image, correct?
I do each individual. Now there are times when, for instance, I have studio lighting and my lighting is identical and their faces turned exactly the same way. If I've got 5 images in a row, they're pretty much the same thing. Then I do the artwork on the first, and then I do a batch process for the rest of those 4 images. So I will do that. But if they're even just a little bit different, it's individual. Now I do try to go through that quickly, but that's why I cull first. So I'm not doing any artwork at all first. I'm culling first. I'm thinking, do I even want to spend any time with this photograph? And so I will eliminate quite a few of them before beginning that step. Yeah. Now, if let's say I'm creating an image, let's say I painted on canvas and I used photographs as something that I can, use as reference. So I'm photographing that cityscape, I'm photographing that landscape, I'm photographing that flower. And if I photograph several images of it, then I go through and I pick one. Now, if there are elements of several different ones, then I may pick several, there may be, I like this item in this image, I like that item in this image. So I may have a collection of images that I'm putting together, or I may have something where it's something that I'm putting a whole bunch of things together to create an image. Then I may have a bunch of photographs. By the way, I don't paint. I'm picturing how I would do it. So then I would narrow it down just to the images that I felt would be necessary, and it may just be one image in that instance. With a family portrait, generally it's one image. They want one image. Now they do different combinations as well, but there's one main image that goes up on their wall, and the rest of them are usually smaller.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes in. About how much time do you probably spend, let's say, on one photo where it is a group portrait?
That's a good question. Artwork usually is a 10-to-1 ratio. So however long it took me to create the image, usually takes me 10 times to go through the artwork process. Now the artwork process includes the culling. It includes the general lightweight retouching artwork. And then the fine tuning that I do to just the few images that they actually choose. Most families choose 5 images. That's pretty normal. And so if it took that entire process, if it took me an hour to photograph the session, it's going to take me 10 hours of time for the artwork. Does that answer your question, or is that too general?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I went with, something general, because I think, like, when you were talking about knowing your times and stuff like that, I think that's just something that people need to do, especially people who are not coming maybe from photography and graphic design and digital touch-up backgrounds, where you have artists who are now picking up cameras and trying to learn. And I guess I love listening to the artists trying to figure a lot of this stuff out, and it gives me new questions and new ways of looking at things, like stitching, which we were talking about. And I hear Lightroom actually has a great feature for stitching now, which I remember doing those in Photoshop. And like you were saying, I've done that. When you were saying the 8 gig card, I'm like, it was something stitched, because I've done that before where I couldn't even do that. I think at one time I had to use a zip drive for whatever the heck I had stitched at that time. But now that you have Lightroom and you can do something like that really quickly and easily, I think that's great. And again, us coming up with different ways of doing that, because there's people who want to capture every detail sometimes of a painting, because maybe it's a 20 by 30 canvas, but in selling prints and stuff later, they want to go bigger. And so sometimes that means going down and taking pictures in sections of that thing to go ahead and stitch it. I have some artists that do small minutia work, but they are going to have those commercially printed for like an airport, where you go down the wall and you see a section. Kevin Saunders, who you've had on your photo essay speeches before, he actually has some of these really large cityscapes that he's photographed. And
yeah, those are cool.
I don't know if you've ever caught the big prints of them. The detail that he gets on some of those things is like crazy, insane detail. And I mean, I know when things get blown up, you lose detail. So I'm always like wondering, like, God, what is your original capture like that you're, and I think he's shooting it on that wonderful camera that I'm so envious of.
He is, yeah, large format.
Yeah.
So his
But,
image sensor is not little like ours.
yeah.
Most of us have an image sensor about that big. His
Mhm.
image sensor is this big.
Yeah. So he gets wonderful details on those
Mm.
cityscapes. And when I've seen them enlarged, they are amazing. I think to me, for like, and like I said, you work in this for a while and you start to pick up on things like that. But the details that some photographers are able to get and go large on is
Yeah.
where I think it just like, I've missed a flight before, just kind of getting engrossed in something because I'm like just looking at details. So
That's funny.
that's why I travel with my daughter now, so I can so she can pull me along. I think I wear the leash now, so she just can tug me along. But the details are insane, and again, that's where the storage is, and that's where a lot of the work that you're talking about in editing. And I just want artists to know that there is a long time in doing that, so that they don't feel like it's just because they haven't developed their photographic skills and their photo editing skills that that was why I wanted a general work time for you, because you have lots of years of experience. And I know some people think these things get kicked out in a matter of minutes because we have computers now, and it's not like that at all.
It's true. It's still very time consuming. Now you're right about these tools being, they keep on getting better. So Lightroom just had an update, well, probably within the last 4 weeks, that really is a game changer. It's probably their best update, at least the best update I remember in ever. So it now has masking. It didn't have that before. You had to go to Photoshop for that. And this may be on the lighter weight side of it, but still it's pretty darn cool. So if you've got this, well, let's say you have this photograph of me, you can click masking, click on subject masking, and then give it a few moments. It depends on the speed of your computer, but give it a few moments and it will isolate just me and keep it apart from the background, where I can darken that background. I can change the color balance. I can manipulate just me or just the background, because I can click inverse and mess with it. You need a separate mask to do that, but it's so super cool. The things that you can do, which does speed up the process. And so, because, and I don't always mask things out, but if I want to enhance, like the sky in a background, I love enhancing the sky. Now, I don't want to make it unnatural. I don't want to make it look fake. I want it to be the sky. But there's some things that you can do to improve that, and masking's the tool for that. There's other ways to do it too, but masking's the best tool. And this makes that easier. And so and that's been within the last month. This will probably speed up my workflow though.
Yeah.
And I haven't timed it, in the last month, but I would assume that the things that have happened over the years probably have reduced my time. It's probably not a 10-to-1 ratio anymore. But that's what I used to plan for it. And usually I spend about half an hour with a portrait session, because I do just whatever it takes to get the job done. My goal isn't to wander around with them. I used to feel like if I spent more time with them, that they would value it more, that they would really appreciate that I gave them the extra time. I found it was the opposite. I found that they got tired of the session. They weren't as excited about it anymore when it went too long. And you don't know when that break point changes, when they go from being happy about doing this to being, oh, this is tiring. I don't want them to ever feel tired or I'm kind of done with this. If it's a family portrait, dads often get tired of it. Kids often get tired of it. And so if you can get it done in less than 30 minutes, you should get it done in less than 30 minutes. And that means no wandering around a park.
Yeah. I'm guessing that's more with the groups. You probably have a little more time when it's an individual, correct?
Well, if it's a headshot, usually it's about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And of course, I like to talk to them and find out who they are and what they do. And so the talk time probably takes another 10 minutes. The talking time does take longer than the photography time.
Yeah. I've been really impressed with photographers that have kind of created an experience with the photo shoot process of it. I did one with Roy Varga. He's out of California. He does a lot of the pinup shoots and he travels. And I really liked his photography, and I just kind of wanted to get that whole experience of insight of how he did. But when I got there and did it, it was just amazing on the experience. And then, me having a dad who's a mechanic, and he's collected, 57 Chevy Bel Airs since I was little. I was total rat rod nerding out on this thing still, but it was, awesome. Just the experience he created, the sets that he had built for the photo shoots, so that you were kind of all in one space, but you had different looks and everything. And I thought that was, there he is. Yeah, he's amazing. I've got a picture with him. I go, my goodness, I go, and actually it's so funny. I loved all the stuff he did, and I loved his editing. But I had to get a selfie with him because I had seen him so many times at so many car shows, and I loved watching him work. And I tell people that's where I kind of geek out. Sometimes it's like I buy photos by different photographers, because it's like people who've grown up and they have Enzel Adam posters. I probably have a ton of Enzel Adam posters from when I was a teen. But I grew up still wanting to purchase, photography as art. And so getting to meet the photographers that I've kind of followed, I do get geeked out, and we'll get the selfie with them too. Because
good.
They're my mini, it's my celebrity moment there, So I think I did one where they were shooting a celebrity, and I think that's what they was assumption. I was going to come up to ask for the celebrity's photo, but I wanted it with the photographer. So like I said, there's a lot.
That's cool. I bet the celebrity was thinking, well, that's a first.
Yeah, it probably was. I can't even remember if it was Donny Osmond or somebody like that, but it was, there's just, there's photographers who've made a really great name for them. Let's see, we have Annie Leibovitz, who does a bunch of master talks now. And I think she was here at the Tobin not too long ago, but
yes,
these are people who've kind of created a whole art form, and it's all of these steps that you're talking about, the after photography that kind of creates those shots. Like you said, a lot of people think it's one click, and there's so much work behind there. I've gotten to talk to people who've been assistants for some of those photographers, and when you say a team, there's sometimes huge teams that work on this photography, basically the photographers. So it's amazing.
There is a ton of stuff that can be done. I mean, that's, as far as what's possible in image manipulation or image enhancement, your mind is probably the only limitation to it. Pretty much everything, if you can picture it, is probably doable. Now, you may not have the tools, the skills necessary to do it, but someone does, and you can pay them for it. I once paid someone who does 3D rendering, because I didn't know how to do it, but I knew the image in my head required it, and I didn't know how to do it. I wasn't going to take the time to learn how to do it. I can only spend a certain amount of time per client and still be profitable. And so I paid someone else to do this part of it. And when this particular project took 3 months, and most of my projects don't take anywhere near that much time, but this one did. Partly because of going back and forth between the 3D artists. When you've got one artist working with another artist, you have one artist describes to another artist. The other artist has a belief filter that they see their world through, just like I do, just like you do. And so their version of what I described was not what I described. It was similar, but it wasn't exactly. And so it took a bit of back and forth trying to make it just right, and it wound up not exactly what I wanted initially, but I really liked what it was, and so I didn't ask them to change I don't need to be specific with that. I was going to tell you the story, but I don't need it. I liked what they did, and so we left it, and it was mostly what I had described. There are times when if we don't have the skills, then we can outsource that. We don't need to have the skills. We are as far as portrait artists, we are business people too, and we have to have a specific amount of. We have to give ourselves a period of time to be profitable. We have value. We aren't valueless. So if we spend more time, if we were an employee, that employee would get paid more. And for some reason, as business owners, as photographers, we feel like, well, if we're spending our time, then it didn't cost us anything. You are totally misunderstanding how things work if you think it didn't cost you anything. It did. Yeah. It cost you time with your family. It cost you time, watching Netflix, whatever it is you enjoy doing. It cost you some of that, and that has value. And I'd say it has a lot more value than me paying that 3D artist renderer to do that part for me. So
That's a
I
great,
outsourced it.
yeah, that outsourcing and collaboration. That's what I always recommend, even right now, to some artists who they're watching a lot of these photo tips. Like we put this on our geo galleries there too for replay. And a lot of them are like, well, I don't want to learn photography to get good prints of my art. And I'm like, well, then you got to think about that. You want to go ahead and hire a photographer. And if that photographer is also good well in editing for print to do this stuff, you'd have to find somebody on those, and you have to invest in that. And I mean, working with artists, I've worked with photographers that have charged anywhere from, $20 to $500, and the services in between are vastly different. So that collaboration, sometimes, like I said, that's what you need to do. You have to outsource if you don't want to take that time to learn it yourself. So that's why I think these are so valuable for a lot of artists
That makes
who are
sense.
investing in that and trying to get good prints of their stuff, because that becomes their bread and butter. Because once that painting is sold, it's gone. It's in private collection, and they can't get that shot back. And I'm working with a lot of artists from the 90s who the photos they took were at that time 8 megapixel photos, and it's trying to save these images still. So yeah, that like I said, a lot of the stuff that you've been teaching has like really helped a lot with a lot of people who are really
Cool.
understanding now, getting that concept of coming up. And I appreciate it, because that helps us on an end where we have people now who are a little more educated about bringing a good image to print for their work.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that there's global and specific. The things you can do global are sizing, sizing your image, contrast, color balance, sharpening, or blurring. There's time we want to soften the image. Straightening an image, that's slightly askew. And then there's HDR, high dynamic range, which brings out more detail in shadow areas and more detail in highlight areas. HDR is, we have about 15 stops worth of light that we can see as humans, 14 to 15, somewhere in that range. But our cameras may have less. And I say may. The newer cameras have about the same as we have. Or close to it. They're heading that direction. And the cameras that are 5 years plus, generally speaking, only have about 5 stops of light. Now, let's talk about what a stop is. A stop is a doubling or halving of an amount of light. So if I take the light that's on me right now and I double it, that's 1 stop worth of difference. If I take the light that's on me right now and I cut it in half, that's also 1 stop worth of difference. It's 1 stop less or 1 stop more, depending on which way you go. And so we'd have in that instance just 3 stops of light. You can see how quickly, if you start increasing that light, it gets ridiculously blown out. It's kind of bright right now as it is. And on that other end, it gets to be pretty low light pretty quickly as well. And so we have thirds of stops available on our cameras, because there's really not a whole lot of instance where we need to double or triple, or we don't need to go to too many extremes. We just need a slight change to adjust our light. But HDR brings that 5 stops that a lot of cameras have up to 15 stops worth of light difference, so you can see detail in the shadows and in the highlights. But it can also go beyond that. You can make 20 stops worth of light difference, meaning that you can see areas that even with your own eyes were in shadow, or where there was no detail because it was too bright. So HDR is a good tool. Now, it can be overused just like any tool. Anything in life can be used for good or it can be used for evil. So, yeah, it sounds like a comic or a sci-fi movie. But yeah, we can use these tools for lots of different things. HDR is used a lot in real estate photography. I don't know if anyone watching is a real estate photographer, but you want the details in those shadows. You want the detail in the highlights. You want the room to look good, but you also want outside the window to look amazing. But a lot of times outside the window is just a big white nothing because it's so bright outside. And so therefore HDR can help with that. Now, you could also create separate images and add them in later. So there's multiple ways to doing that, but still HDR just gives a greater dynamic range, a greater range of tones, from the darkest shadows to the brightest highlights and all the shades of gray that are in between. Your camera's meter doesn't understand color. So if you were to photograph a poinsettia, a poinsettia has green, very, very green, saturated green leaves on the bottom, and either white or red. So let's choose red, very saturated red on top. If you were to do a light meter reading, they reflect the same amount of light. So therefore, your camera actually believes that they're identical, that there's no difference between them. And if you photograph that poinsettia in black and white, those leaves, both green and red, would look identical shade of gray in a monotone image. They would look identical, no difference whatsoever. But because we have color contrast, we can see an extreme amount of difference. And on a color wheel, red and green are the opposites. But on a tonal scale, if they are the same surface and reflecting the same amount of light, they're identical in tone. That's kind of interesting, especially if you enjoy black and white. Now, as far as specific, you can get rid of things like pimples, power lines, like I mentioned before. You can even change out a head. You could change out a sky. You could do pretty much anything. I did one yesterday where I used a flash, but you could see the reflection of the flash in the rim of the glasses. Now, in the glasses, there wasn't any reflection in it. Now, that's a problem as well if you're using a flash. But there was no reflection in the glass, but on the rim, they were gold rims, and you can see the reflection of my flash in it. I didn't want that, so I took it out in Photoshop. That's not, you could do that some degree in Lightroom, but that's the better tool for that kind of, that much specific is definitely a Photoshop tool. So those, you know, what's possible, again, everything. If you can think it, you can do it. And if it's not in your skill set, that's not a problem. Hire someone else to do it. Now, what if we don't have any budget for that kind of thing? If you don't have budget for that kind of thing, maybe that's when you take time to learn it, but maybe not, because I don't know that, you know, increasing there's too much stuff. If your goal was to learn everything, there's too much to learn. You could spend every day for the rest of your life, starting today, as a full-time photography image manipulation student. You could spend the rest of your life studying it and still not know all there is to know. There's just too much. Besides, you know that technology keeps on changing. Just keeping up with that alone is overwhelming for most of us. So you can imagine there's a lot. And so in understanding what's going on and basically how things work, good. But understanding and knowing how to do everything, I don't know. I think that's a waste of time. There's certain things, yes. And it's case by case. If someone were asked to ask me, I wouldn't have a blanket statement for them. I'd say, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? Who's your target market? What kind of things do you get excited about? What kind of things do you not get excited about? Because outsource the stuff you don't get excited about. We creatives, the energy that we use to create is positive energy in our opinion. Now, every one of us puts good things in front of us, but the same good things for me may be different for you. So whatever those good things are, do those. Those things that drain you, outsource them. Your creative energy needs someone else to do that for you. So that's my opinion. And so if you can't afford it, then that means your pricing isn't correct. So you adjust your pricing to be able to do that. Now, this isn't a pricing class, but some portrait photographers may think, well, I'm struggling just to get clients as it is. How could raising my prices help? I'll tell you a quick story. In 2013, 8 years ago, I decided I was going to stop doing weddings because they took me an average of 74 hours to complete a wedding. And that really took away from my photography teaching time, which I was really loving and still do. And so I decided to stop doing them, but I didn't know that I wanted to stop because I really enjoyed weddings. And so what I did was I created a single package. So I had, instead of having I think 4 or 5 3, 4, or 5. I don't remember how many packages I had prior to 2013. But in 2013, I just kind of added in everything I was able to do, added in a few more things that are kind of wow, kind of cool. Like one of them was filet mignon dinner for 15 at the Dominion Country Club. I added that to my package. It was never part of it before. So I added some wow things in there, because any opportunity you have for a client to say wow is a positive thing, even if they don't buy it from you. And so I had several things in there that were like that, but that was the biggest one. But I had these wow things in the package, and I added it all up. And the total at that time, it would be higher now, but the total at that time in 2013 was $12,000. It probably in that period of time would have just a regular progression of pricing would have been $15,000 today, but $12,000 then, that was my price for my weddings. I thought at $12,000 I would get no one doing it, no one choosing to do a wedding with me because my price is too high. And if anyone did, well, it's $12,000. I'm going to be pretty darn excited to do it. It did not slow my wedding bookings down. Didn't slow it down. So guys, if you're afraid to raise your price, it's internal. It's not external. I know you think it is because people are telling you, and that is external. I get it. I hear you. But I did that, and overnight, I'm not exaggerating, overnight, just by that one small change, I didn't actually change the price. I just added it all up and had one package. Overnight, my income on weddings doubled. So just raising your price a little bit to accommodate some outsourcing, come on. I also recommend that the portrait photographers increase their prices every year. Now, how much? At least the cost of living. You don't want to lose 3% every year, because that's what happens. So at least that. But I'm saying at least 5%, and maybe 10% is more appropriate. Let's say you charge $400 for something, and next year you're charging $440. How many people are going to say, oh my gosh, you raised your price $40? That is ridiculous. You're a price gouging. I'm not going to do it. Nobody. 10%. Nobody even notices. Not a pricing class, so I'll stop.
Jim,
Let's talk.
Can I ask you a question, though? I know it's not a pricing class, but it's kind of pertinent, especially for FinerWorks. Are you seeing much of an increase in what photographers are charging? With so in our industry, printing, printing photographers work, and we've been kind of, resisting it as much as we can, but our suppliers have raised their prices dramatically. Cost of paper's gone up, cost of picture frames, all the auxiliary items surrounding it, from the acrylic glazing, just the packaging supplies, everything's gone up. But what about the photography industry itself? Has there been much of a change in what photographers are, because at some point they're going to have to charge more, because if they're going to a photo lab, or or even if they're printing on, producing the prints themselves, they're having to pay more, or they will be soon.
Average Joe portrait photographer, average Joe, not that good on the business side. So therefore, they may see the changes. They may notice a price going up, but they are basing a lot of their decisions on how it feels. And they're thinking, I'm struggling to get clients as it is. If I raise my prices, I won't get any, or I'll get fewer. And so they're basing, instead of basing their decisions on business, I mean, it is math. And I know a lot of us creatives aren't the biggest math fans. In fact, I have come across several that just kind of put their hands up effectively. I mean, they may not actually put their hands up. When I start talking about math, even if I'm talking about fractions for f-stops, they're like, wait, I didn't realize there was going to be math. So, so we aren't necessarily the best business people. And so I don't know that we're noticing that because we're basing our pricing on what everybody else is charging. The average Joe photographer is looking at what other photographers charge, and they're looking at comparables. Kind of like if you're a house appraiser, you look at other houses in the area that are similar to the one you're appraising, and you have a comparable to the other houses. I think photographers are doing it like that. They're looking at other photographers, what it is that they charge, and they are looking at photographers they see, and they kind of judge, is that person better than me? Have they been doing it longer? Am I better than that person? So there is a little bit of that going on, but it is 100% internalized when it shouldn't be. Photography is not a commodity. It's not like a can of beans, on the store, on the shelf at the grocery store. Where price, does play a bigger role. But we have a custom product, and to price a custom product as equivalent as a commodity means, I don't know, you didn't take Business 101 when you were in school, because and I didn't realize it either, even though I did take Business 101 when I was in college. I had photography, I had business as my minor. It didn't help me one bit. And the photography program that I have a degree in photography, they didn't require any business whatsoever. It was my choice to do that business, but it helped me. No, it didn't help me at all, because it was all corporate stuff. It wasn't small business, not even a word of small business. They did talk about the definition of an entrepreneur, but that's about the extent of what they talked about. So photographers are not paying attention. I'm saying average Joe. There's a lot of them that are pretty savvy and are paying attention. And they are raising their price, but average Joe, it doesn't. Their expenses, for some reason, are disconnected from their price.
Yeah,
which is a really weird thing.
Yeah, and we're seeing some of the same thing with the artists that we talk to. Again, we have not yet been forced to make any major price increases. But some things we expect there will be some adjustments in 2022. So I was just wondering how it was feeling what was your sense in the photography community? And I'm guessing what will happen is that it will eventually catch up, and you'll start to see an increase in what photographers are charging, even those that are just charging almost nothing just to get the clients. We'll start seeing more.
You're right. Yeah, and well, a lot of them aren't doing printing, and they, to me, that's something they should be doing. And now this is just my opinion, and not everybody's going to share it. But in my opinion, if there's more work to be done, the professional is not done yet. Let me repeat that. If there is more work to be done, and you call yourself a professional, you have more work to do. So if you're photographing a family portrait, the end result, generally speaking, on a family portrait is a print on the wall. Because it's not the same thing as a headshot for a LinkedIn profile image. It has a different purpose, a different reason for being. So if you're photographing family portraits and you're giving out your digital files at the end, you are forcing your client to do work that you as a pro should be doing. It'd be the equivalent, and I give this example all the time. If you were a roofer and you thought, you know what? Everybody knows how to use a hammer and nails. You know what? I'm going to start letting them do that. They know how to do that part. This is going to cut my time in half. I could charge less for it. This is great. This would be them getting excited about it. And so they go and they bring that roll-off dumpster. They take the old roof off. They throw that in the roll-off dumpster and get the roof all prepared. They put the shingles over on the side of the house, and they go back out to their car and get situated and put their ladder away, and then come up to your door with this bag of something with a bow on it. And they ring the doorbell and they say, "All right, I'm done. You guys know how to use a hammer and nails. Have fun. By the way, I have this bag of nails for you for free. My gift to you." There is no roofer who would do that. And they're not even artists. Artists should care about the completion of their work. How much of an artist are you if you're not there for the completion? What about a painter painting on a canvas? They could have that same, if they could do the same thing. They might think as they're going through, oh, you know what? If I don't finish this, I could save a lot of time. I could charge less for this. Those people know how to use a paintbrush. I could just give them the paints that I'm using and they could finish it up. There's no artist who would do that. So why are photographers doing it? Why are portrait photographers doing this kind of thing? I think it's because they haven't thought it through. I don't think they're being mean to their clients. I think this is just what a lot of people are doing. So they're seeing everybody else do it. And so it's just not crossing their mind that it's part of their responsibility. So it seems odd to me, but then again, I started before digital. I started, a decade before I started full time. My first paid job was in 1983, so part time. It was even before that. I started well before, when it was just you just finished the job. It wasn't even a question. It never came up as a possibility. You never saw people sell their negatives. It just didn't happen. Photographers completed the job with a period at the end of the sentence. You'd go into photographers' offices and there would be the frame triangles. What are those things called? What's behind you, Melissa? The samples, the frame samples? Yeah.
The corner samples.
Corner samples, thank you. I couldn't think of it all of a sudden. So the corner samples, you'd see that in photographers' offices. All the studios would have them. But a lot of photographers have never once framed an image. And there's a smaller number, but a lot of photographers who have never printed a single one of their photographs. And when they finally do, they have this wonderful feeling. Man, it feels good to see your photograph printed. That should be part of the deal. They should already know this feeling. For it to be the first time is surprising, but at least there is that first time and they get to have that feeling. And maybe they'll want more of that feeling and complete the work. And that is part of after the photography. So I'm good with talking about it. But again, that's this one guy's opinion. Not everybody is going to appreciate it. In fact, some people get upset with that. But that what I just said, I have had people, very few, but I have had people say that I am offended with your opinion. And I just can't fathom that. What other industry chooses not to complete the job, especially an artist? Be there for the completion of your artwork. Come on, guys. That's just bottom baseline caring, in my opinion. All right, so when we save an artwork file, we're back to the computer. We're saving an artwork file. There are different file types that you can save to. Think about, let's talk about the different file types. There's thousands of different file types, by the way, but there's only a handful that photographers use. And so let's talk about those. I'm going to talk about some popular image file formats. I'm going to share my screen. This is not what I've written. You'll see it in green. This is something that came straight from Wikipedia. And I took out the pieces that I liked and I didn't use everything. But let's share that real quick. You should see on your screen JPEG. You've heard of JPEG before, and you see it as JPG or JPEG. It stands for, and you may not have known this, Joint Photographic Experts Group. Did you guys know that? That's what JPEG stands for. I didn't know for a long time. So you'll see it listed, and you see that here as JPG or JPEG. You see that right there. And nearly every digital camera saves in that as its default. However, there's a RAW file format that's even better, because a JPEG, and well, I'm not going to read this to you, you can read it on your own, but a JPEG's goal is to reduce a file size while trying to keep the quality level pretty much the same. And it does a pretty good job of it. It's certainly far from perfect. Let's go to an extreme. Let's say if you created in your camera, you change it to monochrome, black and white. If you have it in JPEG, it actually deletes all color information. If you have it in RAW, you'll see the black and white version on your screen after you've created the image, but RAW doesn't delete anything. The color information is still there. And so I absolutely recommend not to use JPEG in camera unless you have a very specific reason for doing so. And the specific reason may be you're photographing an event, and the organizers of that event, for some reason, need those images immediately following. And I've done events like this where the organizers were going to put those images up on their Facebook page or on their website immediately following. And so within 5 minutes of an event ending, I would have their images to them, and they could upload them. They can do whatever they want with the images. If I was using RAW, I would never get it done that quickly. So there are good reasons to use JPEG in camera. But for the most part, I recommend doing RAW, and then so you can do your processing afterwards and then save as JPEG before you send it to the printer. That's how I recommend that part of it. Now, there are other file types that photographers use, like TIFF, tagged image file format. This is a great file format. It's big. It is bigger than a RAW, but it is a very high quality. If I'm in the process of working on an image and it's flat, meaning it doesn't have layers, I will save it as a TIFF and go have dinner and then come back afterwards. If it is, you can save a TIFF as you can save a layered image as a TIFF, but man, the file size gets ridiculous. It's just huge. And so I don't see any good reason to do that. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So RAW is what I have next. And this is available now on every single digital camera. The earlier models back in the, when I first started, you didn't always see RAW as an option on all the cameras. In fact, some of them only had JPEG. Some of them had TIFF, and I don't see TIFF as much anymore available on camera. But RAW is the way to go. And Adobe's digital negative, DNG, digital negative, this is a standard for RAW images. So whether it's Canon or Sony or Nikon, Fuji, whatever brand it is, this can standardize RAW files. And so that's why I use copy as DNG when I'm importing images into Lightroom. And that's every single time. Every single time I do that. Now, there is something called EXIF, and that's an exchangeable image file format. Now, this is a file that goes along with the image file that stores all the different specific information about that image. It stores the file, the camera type. It stores the lens that was used, the f-stop, the shutter speed, the ISO that was used, whether or not a flash was used. It could include GPS information if your camera has that and it's turned on. So an EXIF file is a text file really, that goes along with the image file. So it's not an image file in and of itself, but it is paired with an image file. And it is what is stripped off when you upload your images to social media. So all that information, copyright, everything is stripped off when you upload your images to social media. So they become, at that point, in copyright terms, they are, oh man, I forgot what that was called all of a sudden. Well, anyway, that information is stripped off of there. Additional image file types you're going to see are PSD, GIF, PNG, BMP. By the way, BMP is something you're just not going to see much anymore. But PSD, this is absolutely going to be used in Photoshop when you have layered files, when you are using different layers in order to create what it is you're doing. If you're just adding text, adds a new layer. So save in PSD, but PSD is when you're working on it stage. When you're going to print, you're going to save it as, generally speaking, a JPEG that has been optimized for the size that you're going to be printing. The GIF is just it's just for online images, and it's more for graphic images than it is for photographic images. PNG, if you want to have a background that is nothing. There's no ones or zeros in the bit. It's nothing. And on a Photoshop image, it looks like a white and gray checker pattern, but there's nothing at all there. Then that's PNG. So it's very similar to a JPEG, but it would be if you wanted a transparent background. All right. That's probably enough for that part. How do you guys feel about that?
I'm good with that. I mean, is there a big what's the with PSD and flattening an image? What do you lose? How much quality do you lose when you flatten versus saving it as a PSD?
Okay, that's a good question because I absolutely save the final version as PSD just in case I want to come back to it later.
Hmm.
And when I flatten it, there are some changes, but they're generally not something I'm worried about. So if I've got text and I've got some shadowing, there is a slight bit of change in that shadowing. But for the most part, it's a non-issue.
Yeah. Because for us as printing, James, correct, it's better when people submit their files flattened, correct?
Yeah, it is. We have some exceptions like the textured bond prints. We have in that case, we encourage people if they want to control the texture itself, the pattern of the texture, then you can submit a layered TIFF file, and we have some instructions on our blog on how to do that. But in general, yeah, flattening a file does several things. One is it removes the potential for having hidden layers actually show up, because not all software programs adequately hide layers. You may think that the layer is hidden, but it may only be hidden in that particular software program that you're hiding it in. The other is that it shrinks the file size. So when you flatten an image, and we with the exception that I had mentioned, we don't need the file to be in layers, and we don't want to take any. We've seen it happen time and time again. A person submits a layered TIFF file, which has all these different layers, but they meant to hide some of it. It might have, notes or something, that they added with a text tool. And our staff, they're not necessarily going to catch that, and because
Don't know what the intent is.
array of images and weird things that people print is it's unfathomable. So it's like, okay, well, I guess they meant to print that. We have too many images, with the thousands of images that we deal with a day. You can't really
Humanly possibly put eyes on them.
So flatten the layers in TIFF. Don't use compression. You can compress TIFF files. I don't quite understand how that differs to compressing a file as a JPEG. So if you do want to shrink a file even more, so I just change it to a JPEG. But yeah, so other than that, yeah, keep it unlayered.
And I think this goes great into your last part of the presentation, is preparing for printing, right, Jim?
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of different last steps a lot of different directions we can go. Some of us, print ourselves. I don't recommend printing yourself. There's a lot of advantages to working with the pros. They do this day in, day out. They know what looks good. They know what high quality is. If you've got your own printer, you have a very surface level view of that kind of thing. But it is something that some people do, and so that's why it's included here. And at one time, I actually had my own printers, and I did my own printing until I realized how much better, how much more quality, how much more consistency professional labs have. And so that's why I like working with FinerWorks. Because of that consistency, because I can rely on it. If there's a problem, I know that they would fix it, and it wouldn't cost me anymore. If I'm printing myself, it costs more. And I've got a lot of maintenance that I would have to take care of. I have not had a printer other than an office printer in my office in years, because it's just not worth it. Now, they have gotten better. They absolutely have gotten better. But I just don't want to deal with it. I've got too many other things to do. Plus, I know my numbers, and I know I can't spend that time there because I've got other places I want to give my clients my time. And so I have to cut somewhere. And by the way, it costs less, unless you value yourself at zero, it costs less to have someone else print it for you. a lot less.
Mhm.
But that's only once you've done your numbers. Do you realize that?
And people don't realize that most reputable printers will offer a money back guarantee. So if for some reason you order from a remote photo lab and you don't like the print, the quality of the print, contact them, let them know, hey, I'm something's off or whatever, and most of them will reprint it for you. And so whereas if you're printing on your own, you're having to spend just as much money on ink, material supplies that you did for that first print that you didn't like. So plus you're never going to make back unless you're printing, and this is the way especially inkjet is geared, good quality inkjet printing. It is almost impossible to make back what you spend in printing if you're printing on your own, unless you're printing a lot. Yeah. And that's just the nature of that business model.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So, one of the things that I believe is your last step after you've done your artwork and you're about to flatten it, is you optimize for the size. So there's different reasons why you're going to do this. It could be that you're creating an image that's for the internet. It's for something very specific, like a profile picture, and you want to optimize for whatever that size is, whatever the appropriate size. Go to LinkedIn and find out what the appropriate size is. It's 400 by 400 pixels, by the way, on LinkedIn. If you're going to Facebook, find out what that is, and optimize it for that purpose. Now I sometimes actually double it, whatever that is. I sometimes double that, but that tells you the exact size at 72 DPI. 72 DPI is for screen resolution. 300 is for print. Now that doesn't mean you can't print something that is 300. That is at 72 DPI. That's not what that means at all. But let's say you've got 5,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels. If you divide those numbers by 300, you know what your print size optimized is. But you have a little leeway there. That's optimized. That's the best possible. But you can actually multiply that by 4 and still get very solid photographs, very solid prints. Especially if you're photographing to a surface like canvas, you got even more leeway on canvas. So photographs for print, size is still important. Again, your images, the exact size you need. You don't have to do this, but I like to, especially if it's a smaller size print. If I know I'm going to be printing an 8 by 10, I want to save it as an 8 by 10 size. Because if I send it straight from what I've done and I've never cropped anything, what you have is an equivalent of an 8 by 12 if you haven't cropped anything. And so online the software causes you to be able to line it up just right, but I just want to make sure. And so I crop it as an 8 by 10, and I don't have to worry about cropping those 2 inches off being the way I don't want it. It's exactly the way I want it when I send it in. So that's what I choose to do. 8 by 10. If I'm printing 8 by 10, I do 8 by 10. And that says pixels. That's not supposed to say pixels. That's supposed to say inches. If you're looking at the handout, 8 by 10 inches at 300 DPI.
And if you want to see the difference visually, go take that 400 by 400 pixel and go try to make an 8 by at 72 DPI and try to make it into an 8 by 10. And you'll see you'll see immediately what the difference is.
Yeah. Most popular print sizes have that, what we call a 4 to 5 aspect ratio, which is what an 8 by 10 is. And your common 4 by 5 aspect ratios are 8 by 10, 4 by 5s, obviously, 8 by 10s, and 16 by 20s. And those are the most common sizes we see, but most people's cameras shoot a 2 to 3 aspect ratio, which are good for 4 by 6s, 8 by 12s, and 16 by 24s. So, so cropping up beforehand is always good. if most services have tools to allow you to do that if you're ordering online, but it's real easy to do that in Photoshop and Lightroom as well. If you can do it beforehand, like Jim said, all the better, because doing it on your desktop, you're generally going to have more control.
Jim, do you have any preference? People are asking about is your watermarks or onto your final copies for clients. Do you recommend keeping them on there or not?
All right. So case by case basis, there are times when it's absolutely appropriate to have something on your print, whether that's a watermark, whether that is an imprint, an embossing, or whether that is a live signature. So for all of my artwork, my completed work that's going up on someone's wall, it has a live signature. I have gold foil and a heated ballpoint pen. I put the gold foil on the print. I had to take that heated ballpoint pen. It's a pen that has a electrical cord coming off of it. You plug it into the wall, and I sign that that gold foil. It embeds it actually into the print itself. By the way, practice that. If you're going to do that, practice that a lot before you do that, because if your signature doesn't look good, if you don't like it, you have to reprint in order to fix the problem. So practice that signature a bunch of times, waste a bunch of gold foil, that's fine. But at first I probably did mess up a handful of them, but it had been years since I've had one that was okay. Some of my signatures don't look as good as I'd like for them to, but there haven't been any that have been so bad that I've decided to reprint because of it in years. But I like the live signature. I think that's top of the line. That's the best. And embedded, and then not with a Sharpie. Sharpies look like crud. They just don't look very good. I did that too, and that's my opinion. If you think Sharpie looks great, go for it. Do the Sharpie. If you're doing a black and white print, that kind of actually looks good. However, in that instance, I have silver foil. So I have actually three different. I've got gold, which I use a ton of. I use silver, which I use rarely because I just don't do a whole lot of black and white. And I also have bronze. And there's very little need for that. I've had that one in my toolbox for years and I just don't use it. But the gold I use quite a bit. Watermarks, if it's going to go online for marketing purposes, I want to have a watermark on it. Now, not in the middle of the print, down in the bottom right corner. That's where I want it to be. If I'm gifting images to them for social media purposes, I'm reducing the quality level and I'm adding in my watermark.
I think a lot of photographers do that right dead center just because of social media so easily right click and people crop out. So I think that's matter of your own personal preference and safety.
I agree.
Deal with it. So there's a lot of ways I think to also you can I mean, I know you can take in just Google alone, you can drag your image up to the search bar and search for it to see if it's been shown anywhere, but I just don't see like the watermark doing. There's just always ways around stuff. So
yeah, and there's I don't use my watermark for the purpose of keeping other people from stealing the image. I use it for marketing purposes. So if someone's going to steal the image, they weren't going to buy it anyway, and so I'm just not worried about it. I have seen my work used commercially before. I had a photograph of a group of higher ups at a bank for a very specific purpose, and the bank wound up using that image for their marketing campaign with not saying a word to me ever. So and there's other examples like that. That's probably the most obvious one, because how could they be unaware that that's illegal?
At least
and then they went out of business. I never had a chance to. It wasn't long after that, within a few months. And I don't. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say it's just probably karma there.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I'm not as concerned about that. I understand why people are concerned about it, and so I don't have a problem with them choosing to do that. I just don't personally choose it. I'm using it as a marketing tool, solely as a marketing tool, not as a. It is on a little bit for that copyright side of things, because any image that you upload to Facebook or any other social media is shared ownership with that social media company. They had the ability to sell that image to someone else without saying a word to you. They had their own stock photography, their own stock art, and people can buy from them. And if it has my watermark on it, then the people who are looking through it will look at that and think, oh, well, I'm not going to get that. So that's what I choose. That's why.
Yeah. Well, Jim, we always appreciate your time in doing these. And like I said, and especially when we have these topics, I think work well, not only for photographers, but also artists that are looking to do printing. Because I think a lot of people don't do file organization, like you're saying, like me, since I started assisting artists with photographing or scanning, making copies of things, I Terra Drive big time, and stick things on there. But organization is important, especially because we get this quite a bit, even from photographers, is that sometimes you have people asking if we still have their files saved. We purge 1 year after printing on your temporary files. So if you're printing with us, if you're going to be using these multiple times, it's best to save an inventory. But temporary files, especially with photographers that do portrait work and stuff like that, they're thinking, they just load up in temporary because they're making their thing. But then 5-year anniversary comes around or something happens and they want another shot of that. The ones who have not had any kind of file system for those digital images do contact us and ask us if possibly we could pull this up. And like I said, for our file storage, that we have to purge our temporary files.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
Yeah. So if you're a photographer who's doing that, like I said, I don't know how many photographers do that, kind of do an anniversary package. If you contact people that you've done weddings for and have, need to make prints, here's some extra prints or stuff like that. I've only seen a few people do that before, but yeah, so it's really important. It's even for artists, if they're going to be doing your images, I save a TIFF file at the highest resolution that I've done. Like if you wanted to, you could probably make this thing into a 5 foot by 6 foot, and it's from a 2-inch piece of art. So, but I'll scan it really high, and then I format it for the print I want to do, 16 by 20. I bring it down because I don't want to have to suck up all of that storage or that time uploading. So like I said, all of these tips work for both photographers and artists. So it's much appreciated. What do you have going on for Photo SA?
We have a guy named Abel Garcia is going to be with us on Thursday of next week. He's a photographer, a local photographer. He does several other things too, but he also interviews different professionals. He's got a podcast that he does. It's really kind of cool, where he interviews other creative professionals, and he's going to share what his motivation is and why he does that, and some of the stories that have been shared by those other creative professionals that he's interviewed. And so that is a week from today. So Thursday, I don't know what date that is, but it's next week, a week from today, 9th. And if someone were to go to meetup.com/photo SA, they could get the information on that. Meetup.com/photo SA. So that's where to get that.
All right. And do you have a topic for January that you want to share for Photo Tips Monthly?
We're going to be talking about portraits, but we're going to be talking about portrait planning. What I do is called I call it SMILE detail techniques, and it's an acronym. So it's an S, an M, an I, an L, and an E, and then details. But it's my method for learning who my client is, what they are, what their interests are, so that I can create a picture in my mind. I visit with them, I talk with them for an hour or two, just to find out who they are. So I create a picture in my mind, and then we create that picture. And so these are my steps to be able to create the images that I create.
Great. Yeah, because so those are tips that help, because sometimes you get into a creative stump on how you're doing, and kind of having a system sort of helps you go through that checklist
Mhm.
to get your workout. So that'll be great. And so we'll have that for January. And like I said, again, happy belated birthday,
Thank you.
Jim. So we appreciate all that. And
I appreciate it.
hope you all have a great holiday and happy new year. And we'll see you next month.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Thanks, James. Thank you guys for being here. See
And
you
we'll
later.